In this video, we are going to create a clipping and notching sample. Clipping and notching are two different things. They're kind of opposites of each other, so we're going to do them in the same sample so you can see what they look like side by side. For this video and this sample, you're going to need 2 sample squares, a seam gauge, a marking pencil, your pins, fabric shears, and this guide is helpful. It's on the back of your self-paced lesson 5. And it kind of helps show everything that's happening. So if you're not really sure what's happening in the video, you're welcome to follow along on these instructions as well with that diagram. The other thing you're going to need later on is your iron right here and your ironing board in addition to your machine. So let's get started. The first thing that we're going to do is we're going to draw this S shape right here on the edge of one of our fabric squares. So I'll just pick a random one. I'm going to go kind of towards the right side. Get a marking pencil that will show up on whatever colored fabric you have, and you're going to draw an S. Sometimes it's hard to draw an S, so I like to start at the top of, at like the middle of the curve here. It's going to be an elongated S, so it's not like a really sharp S. It's just kind of stretched out, loose. You can see the one on your paper too. So just an S. I have my S drawn right here. I'm going to put it with my other piece of fabric, line them up together, and I'm going to sew on top of that S. So I will go ahead and do that. As I'm sewing, it can be a little bit tricky, so you're going to want to make sure to guide using your fingers. Make sure that you keep your fingers out of the way so they don't get sewn over though. But we'll go ahead and sew that. I'm going to bring my machine in closer so you can see what I'm doing. I will be just sewing along the S and just angle this so you can see that a little better. Awesome. Okay, so I'm going to backstitch using my reverse button right here. I'm going to do my best to follow the S. This little line right here on my foot pedal or my presser foot is going to give me the best idea of where to go. And if I click on this button right here on my machine, that's going to make it so that every time I end a stitch, my needle ends in the down position. So if I have to lift up my presser foot and move a little bit, it's pretty easy to do without losing my place. So I'm going to try that. You'll notice I'm kind of pushing and pulling as I go, and I might not follow my S perfectly, but I'm trying to get a general S shape without a big corner anywhere. Once I'm done, I'm going to go ahead and backstitch, and then I can press this button and press my foot pedal one time, and my presser foot or my needle will come up. I'm going to trim those threads before I move on any further, and it's not a perfect S, but you can see I have an S shape going on here. Okay, now for the clipping and notching. Pull this out. So again, you have this paper that you can use as a reference. Anywhere that I have a concave curve, I'm going to do something called clipping. So that's the curve where it's kind of going in, and anything that's a curve going out where the top of my curve or like the peak of my curve is closer to the seam allowance, that's called the convex curve, and I'm going to do something called notching. You can see right here, clipping is just a straight line, notching is cutting some triangles, and they have different purposes. A clip is going to help reduce bulk when I turn my fabric to the right side. Because right now it's inside out, and I'm just doing these little clips close to, but not through, my seam, about 1/8 of an inch away from the seam. And I'm just doing a few here and there, about every 1/4 inch from at the top of by the curve. So you can see those. And those will allow my seam allowance to spread out like that. Notching is cutting little triangles, and I'm going to do those again up about 1/4 inch from my seam line. I'm going to cut some little triangles about every 1/4 inch. Once you turn it the other way, you'll notice if you need more or less, if you'll need more of the notches. I'm just going to do a few right now. Awesome, and I'll turn this clip into a notch because it's kind of more on the convex. So now you'll see my sample matches my paper pretty good. I have clips on top, notches on the bottom, and now I'm gonna turn it right side out, and I want you to see what happens when I turn it right side out. This part is tricky, so I want you to really make sure you're following along. So my curves are they're gonna go kind of opposite. Right now I have some clips up here and notches, but when I turn it right side out, it's gonna look opposite because these notches right here are gonna allow the fabric to come together. You can kind of see this right here. The fabric is gonna come together and fill in that space where the notch is. So all of those notches are starting to look more like clips. You can see that. I'm trying to show you, but you can see they're coming together, and that's helping me reduce bulk, so I don't have so much seam allowance right here. On this other curve, our concave curve, the notches are going to do the opposite thing. When I turn it right side out, you're going to notice that they spread out. So they're going to spread out like that and look more like notches. They're going to go from clips to notches. It's pretty interesting, but what I'm going to do is turn my fabric right side out so that I have a curve here, and then the top of the S, you're going to have to kind of open up your seam allowance, pinch where the seam is, and pull that out in order to get the S to make its full S shape. Okay, so just to re-emphasize, our clips help to reduce tension because when they are flipped the other way, they are able to spread out so that our seam allowance isn't holding back this top of the S. If we don't have those clips there, the S won't ever be able to come out that full curve. Our notches help remove some of the bulk because they come together. The seam allowance is going to be scrunched up here, and so those notches help prevent the seam allowance from getting quite so scrunched up. Okay? Now I'm going to go ahead and press this. So I'll pull my iron over right here so you can kind of see what I'm doing. As I press it, sometimes it's kind of hard to poke out the corners or the curves as you're going. So I like to use my seam gauge, just the metal part, not the plastic part, because the plastic part will melt, but the metal part I can iron over. So I can use almost like a little finger in there underneath my iron so I don't burn my finger. So I'm just gonna start at the top of my curve, and I'll put my seam gauge in there to help hold it flat. And then I'll go open up my curve just a little bit more and find the next spot that I need to push out. I should be able to see the seam right here. If I can't see the seam, then it's not coming out as far as it can. So for example, if it looks like that, it's not coming out as far as I can. If I push till I can see the seam, then it's coming out as far as possible. So I'm gonna make sure it's coming out as far as possible and press. And I have one half of my curve done. The other half gets a little bit trickier. Again, this is where I have to open it up and pinch that, just pull it out. And this is where my seam gauge really becomes helpful because I can kind of push it in to the top of that curve so that I don't lose my spot. Make sure your plastic piece is far away on the other side and you're not putting the iron on that plastic piece because it will melt. But I can iron over the metal, and you can see now I have a nice curve each way. If I open it up, I have my clipping and notching inside. My clips spread out so they look like notches now, and my notches came together so they look like clips. They're kind of funny that they go opposite like that, but that is the clipping and notching sample.